Evan here for Grips.com. Continuing with Project You Can Get Me Stackin. Today's question and answer is going to be short and sweet, and that's because it's a topic that I think people make it out to be a little more complicated than it needs to be. And I've had some questions on like how to do this perfectly and what system do you use, and like it's a pretty simple thing. You guys are like, what the hell are you talking about? So I will get to the question right away so you guys can know what I'm referring to. Short question, but I'll still get a decent answer. Hey Evan, I really enjoy watching your videos and getting improvements. My question is, note-taking system, how to build it and keep it short and informative. Thanks, Adrius. And the idea of keeping it short and informative is pretty much on point because, well, one, when you're making your notes on the poker software, you only have like so much space to work within, so you can't like make like crazy long notes and write novels about every hand that happens because you're just going to run out of space. And the other thing is, if your notes are way too long, well then when you need the most during a hand to get that extra bit of information, if your notes are too long, you aren't going to be able to get through them and get any value from them being there. So you need notes that are like really easy to understand, short and sweet. But don't worry, there's a bit more to the answer than that. I'm not just going to leave you hanging on like 2 sentences. So let's get to the presentation. How to take notes the right way. First thing to say is that there is no single right way to take notes. There is no best way to take notes. My way is going to be different from my buddy's way. It's going to be different from your way. It's going to be different from your buddy's way. As long as you're taking notes and you figured out a system that works for you, you're doing the right thing, because the only wrong way to take notes is to not take them at all. As long as you are taking notes and gathering information and profiling your opponents and getting more info about them that you're going to be able to use later to make more profitable decisions at the table, you're doing something right. And I'll tell you, at first your note system's probably going to be kind of slow, kind of sloppy, take up a lot of space, but eventually you'll perfect it. You'll make it a little better, you'll find improvements, and eventually you'll have a nice abbreviated shortcut system that you understand really well, where you can get a lot of information in like one line of text or in just like a few words of text. But at first you're probably gonna like have to write some sentences and stuff, and that's fine. As long as you start out by taking long notes instead of no notes, that's definitely the right direction. Next thing to know, which builds kind of on the question from yesterday when we were talking about how to review sessions and how we don't want to spend time reviewing standard hands. We also at the same time don't want to make notes on standard things. If someone did something that's totally in the ordinary, like they raised pocket aces under the gun, that doesn't warrant taking up space on your notes, because you have limited space to work with, as we said, with the notes. So you want to make sure that you are using that space effectively. And if you're putting together notes about stuff that everyone does, you're just wasting that space, and there's definitely a more efficient use for it. So if you see someone do something totally normal, that's not something you want to take a note on. You want to find things that are out of the ordinary, something that this specific player does that other players don't do, whether it's good or whether it's bad, just that it's different. You want to make a note of that because it's something that's unexpected. But next time a player makes that certain play, it won't be unexpected because you have a note on them saying that they do that play and what it means. Like if someone check raises a lot as the pre-flop 3-better, that's something that's pretty good to know, because a lot of times when someone 3-bets and then checks the flop, we'll say, okay, dude's giving up, I'm going to bet and take the pot. But if you know someone check raises a lot in that spot, it's going to save you a lot of headache and a lot of frustration. So look for the unstandard things. Next, come up with abbreviations because you want to be efficient with your note-taking system. You want to make the most out of the space you have, and the space you have is very limited. So for example, if someone raises from the cutoff, you probably would want to say RCO, raise from cutoff, rather than writing the whole raise from cutoff. Instead of writing 3 words that takes like 20 characters, you've taken 3 letters and not much space. So abbreviations are key. The button can be BU or B, blinds, SB, BB. You can come up with your own system but I would encourage you to find abbreviations for commonly used words like raise, call, fold, check raise, float, whatever. Come up with a system and use it. And your system is going to be unique from everyone else's. So the other cool thing is if your friends try to steal your notes, they might not understand them because they don't get your system. So that's information that's all yours. And the biggest thing when it comes down to note-taking is that you want to include as much relevant information as possible, because if you just have a note that says, I don't know, player check raise bluff the turn. Cool. So you know that at some point they check raise bluff the turn, but what did the board look like? Did they have a hand that had any equity whatsoever? How many players were in the pot? These things are important. And the more information you can include in your note, the more telling that note's going to be when you look at it down the road. A lot of these notes you take on players, especially if it's in tournaments, you might not see this player again for like 2 months, 3 months. And if your note isn't very clear or very specific, then when you look at it in the future, you might not understand it and you might not be able to benefit from it. So you want to include as much of the story as possible, all the relevant information as possible, while not overwhelming yourself and taking up too much space. So some examples of pieces of relevant information that could be useful are limits of the game. Especially in a tournament, if you take a note on someone when they were playing a $1 tournament and down the road you're playing a $100 tournament and that person pops up again, the fact that you know that that person played a $1 tournament is very, very relevant information, can be very helpful. In tournaments, you want to know what stage of the tournament it's at and how many big blinds the player had, because people will play very differently at the start of the tournament than they will at the end, and they will obviously play very differently when they have 8 big blinds versus when they have like 50 big blinds. So including that information is very important. Next is applicable to all situations, cash games, and tournaments. What are the positions of the players? Because we know that most players are going to have different ranges for playing under the gun than they are on the button. And we also know that players tend to take different actions and play hands differently when there are more players involved in the pot. People are going to play heads-up pots differently than they will play 4-way or 5-way pots. So having that information in there is very important. What action preceded the key action in the hand? Let's say the key action is the player bluffed the river. Well, what led to them doing that? Is it a spot where it's an obvious bluff? Is it a spot where the person took kind of a suicide line of a bluff? What opponent were they up against? Were they up against a tough opponent that they felt they needed to bluff, or were they up against a weak opponent? Because some players are going to play differently against other players than they are going to play against you. Again, all that information is so important. Next, size of bets. Just because someone bet 3 streets, well, there's a big difference between if someone min bets all 3 streets versus if someone full pots all 3 streets. So getting the size of the bets is important, and dynamic, if any, whether it's dynamic between you and the opponent or dynamic between the opponent and someone else. It's important to note that down, because sometimes a play can look spewy, like if someone gets, I don't know, pocket 8s all in pre-flop, but if they have a dynamic where someone had been 3-betting and 4-betting them like 20 times in the last 30 minutes, then it might be justified that that person gets it in with pocket 8s. So it's important to know the context of these things that are happening and that you make note of that. Because if you just say that someone got it all in pre-flop with pocket 8s, but you neglect to include the fact that there was a huge dynamic that led to that, you're going to be making your plays based on that note, that they'll get it in with 8s and then get it in with 9s and stuff, where they might not be willing to get it in with such light hands against you because they don't have any dynamic. So as you can probably get the feel from these points, and there are obviously a lot of other relevant pieces of information that you could include, that you want to get as much of the story of what happened in your notes as possible. So when you look at that abbreviated note, however many letters it is, or color coding, whatever, that you can, put yourself back in that moment and remember what happened in the hand. Be like, oh yeah, I remember when that guy did that, as opposed to like, this guy did what? Okay, I don't really remember that happening. The more information you can include, the more likely you will be to remember the situation and remember more about that player. And the more you can remember about that player, the more information you're going to have, the more useful your notes are going to be. So I'm going to leave this up for a couple more seconds so you guys can get that down. And then I'm coming back to me. So that's how I go about taking notes, and I will tell you, it is a daunting process. But you don't need to worry about taking perfect notes. Just work your way up to it. Start by taking notes. As long as you're taking notes, you're ahead of the guy who's not taking notes, who's just watching the game and clicking the button and just playing through. You're building up a database of information, a wealth of information that's going to pay off down the road in spades. Exponentially, it's going to pay off, because every time you get to take advantage of a note that you have that tells you something very specific about a player, I mean, you're making money every time that situation comes up that other people are not making. And review your notes. You know, maybe once a week, go through the notes you have on players and redo them. Maybe a player has changed their game and a note doesn't apply anymore. Or maybe you took a note that takes up a lot of space and you can shrink it down and make it a bit more compact. Maybe something you thought was relevant before no longer is that relevant of a thing, because to you it's become more standard. And in that case, you can change your notes. But remember, you do have limited space, so you want to make the most of it. But if you find you just want to take down so much information on all the people you're playing against, go ahead and create text documents and save them as the name of the player, and just write down as much as you want about that player. Sure, you won't have it pop up during a session, but if it's for the players you play against every day and you're reviewing those constantly, you're going to get a really clear picture of that player and have a really good idea of how they play, and therefore be able to take advantage of them and exploit their weaknesses, because you know what they are. But for the random kind of donks or crabs that just float through, just take down a note if you can. And just because someone busted on a hand doesn't mean you can't take a note. You can usually go to the hand history in the replayer and write a note there. And those are often the best notes, because the players who are buying in, busting out, disappearing until they reload and come back again are generally the players who are the easiest money. And if you can know in what situation they like to give away their money, you can have a better chance at putting yourself in a position to be in that position with them where they will give you their skrill. And that's what I have to say about note-taking. If you're already doing it, fantastic, and you can start doing it better. Now you have some techniques to be able to improve it, and eventually you will have a kick-ass system that people are just like, damn, man, I don't even understand what all those letters mean. And you're just like, it's cool, I get it. And, you know, I can get all this info in like a split second, because I click and I'm like, know everything. Start by taking down hand histories, then note specific tendencies, and then if you can identify specific weaknesses or ways to exploit, make notes saying like, don't ever bluff this guy, or min bet the river because this guy always spazzes out versus it. And then you're really perfecting the note-taking game, which is a big part of the poker game. Anyway, if you have some other stuff to add to this video, maybe some relevant pieces of information that I missed that you like for note-taking, please let me know in the comments. Let everyone know in the comments. Tell us about your experience with taking notes. Maybe you had a note pay off in an amazing way, or maybe one time you look back at your notes and you couldn't believe the kind of stuff you used to write. I've seen some really funny notes in the past that couldn't believe. But anyway, let me know about your note-taking experiences, how they've paid off, what fun you've had with them, or what you feel you've been missing out on by not taking notes. I don't know. If you have any questions for Project Get Me Stackin', just send them on over to evan@grips.com with the subject line Get Me Stackin'. Hopefully I can answer your question and help you get stacking. And finally, of course, if you're finding these videos helpful, informative, you want to show your support, you want to be notified immediately whenever these videos come out, join the team. Subscribe below to the channel and show your support. Nothing would make me happier. And that's going to wrap it up. I hope you found the video insightful and informative, and you are off on your note-taking endeavors. You'll thank me for it later, because it's going to pay off in big bucks. It's one of the best practices you can do as a poker player. Take those notes. Pay attention. Yeah, this has been evan4grips.com. Same peace.